Okay, welcome everyone back from lunch. Hope you all enjoyed the lunch break. So we'll get started with our afternoon sessions. My name is Bobby Chun. I'm an assistant professor at the Division of Psychology here at NTU. And it's my great pleasure to serve as chair and also provide introduction for Professor Helena Gao, who will be giving the next talk. Professor Gao completed her PhD studies in linguistics from Lund University in Switzerland. And from there, she continued on to a postdoctoral training in psycholinguistics from University of Toronto. Here at NTU, she is the director of the Bilingual Development Lab, where she conducts some very fascinating and important research investigating the acquisition of language, particularly bilingualism, but very importantly, identifying how the mind and language mutually co-construct each other and influence one another. So her research takes a very interdisciplinary method where in addition to methods and concepts from linguistics, she also integrates psychology, developmental sciences, as well as computational methods to really dig deep into the interplay between language, consciousness, and our mental lives. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Helena Gao.
This talk is more for the general audience, even though I'm going to introduce some theory, but my topic is down to the earth. Everybody is experiencing speaking at least one language. Some of you even experiencing speaking several languages within a day, like most Singaporeans here. So my talk is on the is it this one? This is the one. Okay. I press. Which one? Are you sure? Okay. First of all, let's have a recall of a very important study, a pioneering study conducted by Robert Kaplan in 1966. On the basis of analyzing his English as a second language students' essay writings, he found that the students who came from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds showed rhetorical differences in paragraph organization in their essays. And he made a claim, that is, rhetorical differences could reflect different patterns of thinking. This paper was published in 1966. 20 years after, Kaplan has been criticized, referred, and discussed many, many times. And the diagram I'm showing you now has been printed and reprinted countless number of times. And in this diagram, you see that from the intercultural education perspective, he showed these cultural thought patterns based on his students who come from different language backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, who wrote essays in English. And his diagram shows that the English speakers, when they write essays, their organization patterns is like topic sentence, supporting evidence, arguments, evidence again, and then conclusion. So it's straightforward. But then when you come to Semitic speakers who speak Semitic languages, they tend to give you the topic, they sideway a little bit, and then they come back, and then you feel like you are lost, and then they connect you again. And they introduced another topic, going sideway again, but in the end, they continue to talk about the topic, but they don't give you a final conclusion. Then what about people who speak languages that can be labeled in those days, in 1960, called Oriental languages? So Chinese, Japanese, Thai, all these languages. And speakers of these languages introduce a topic, and then they guide you and then they start another topic, and then they start another topic, and until in the end, you feel like you are just going into a circle. So, and those are the other types. Then Kaplan's statement about culture or patterns of thinking, as I told you, have been discussed and argued many times. And eventually, we can turn that Kaplan had to correct himself because he was so much criticized. So in 1987 and 88, he published 2 articles, and he rephrased his claim. And the second one is more or less what he rephrased. He said, no, it's not patterns of thinking. It reflects probably the different writing conventions that are learned in a culture. And even after that, people still criticize this kind of claim. And some people really support the first kind of claim, others support the second type. And now we can turn these 2 claims into 2 arguments. So one is rhetorical differences reflect different patterns of thinking. And the second argument is rhetorical differences reflect different writing conventions that are learned in a culture. And then, which side of the argument would you stand? What kind of evidence can you give? If you pause a second, think about yourself. If you are a bilingual speaker, how would you make the conclusion? So I have 3 questions. One is, if rhetorical differences in writing reflect different patterns of thinking, at what level, at what bilingual proficiency level can the differences be observed? Because he was talking about non-native English speakers writing in English, and they showed that kind of patterns. Then we need to talk about the bilingual issue. So if this is the case, at what bilingual proficiency level can these kinds of patterns be observed? If you are just at the ancient level, you still, of course, you still write in a way how you write in your native language. But if you are advanced second language speaker, probably you can observe it, or probably you cannot. So my question is, at what language proficiency level can we observe this? And the second is, if the rhetorical differences in writing reflect different writing conventions learned across different culture patterns or the culture contexts, then at what language proficiency level can the differences be minimized? Because after all, if you write in English, you don't want to show too much of the ways how you think in your native language. So how can you minimize? At what level can you do that? And the third question is, what are conscious and unconsciously changed in a bilingual's linguistic behavior that might suggest reshaping of the bilingual mind? And my study does not go into the neuro-linguistic aspect, but we can use the behavior data to give some evidence to those people who work on neurolinguistics. Now, let me give you an example. This is the first paragraph written by a very good friend who came to live in Singapore a year ago, and he and his family lived in the United States for close to 30 years. They left China, and then they moved to the United States, and they lived there for 30 years. And I know him well. He's perfect, to me, bilingual, speaking and writing both in English and Chinese. And they have a very good tradition, writing, family letters at the end of the year. And this is the one I received. And this is the first paragraph. You see the colors. Each of the color. Take a look at this first paragraph. It's a 2-page letter. And do you agree that each sentence with a different color actually introduces a different topic? Within one paragraph. And those small letters are just supporting, extra information given to the same topic. So I just make it fonts smaller so that you can see it clearly. Okay, as I told you, this is the writing done by someone who has been using English and Chinese for he's close to 60, and he's a PhD and he has high education. And now, native speakers of English, can you tell that right away this is not written by a native speaker of English? Brian? Jeffrey?
I agree, but it's borderline. It's very borderline.
Very borderline. But do you agree that it's a very good piece of writing?
No, I would agree. The one place that is good is which is he had a good start at the academia.
He had a good start at academia. Yeah, Nadia. So native speakers of English can tell this is not written by a native speaker of English. But then what about the native speakers of Chinese? Native speakers of Chinese, when you see this, do you think this is written by someone whose English is just as perfect, or even you don't know whether this is written by a bilingual speaker or just native English speaker?
I would say in the first message, greetings from Singapore, without knowing it, another year has passed. Now this is a very common Chinese saying. 我是不觉得，不觉得。
Thank you very much. Yeah. So now we can go back to this question. At what language proficiency level can we minimize these culture patterns of thinking? And this is not my students' work. And I won't show you my students' work because I can see right away this is not a native speaker of English. Okay. Then we know that our use of languages is changing. These speakers' English is changing close to the native speakers of English. And his Chinese probably is also changing because a native speaker of Chinese who read this, if I write my English, I don't write it in this way. And I can't reach that level. Then are we aware of the change of the language that we are speaking? I mean, you yourself as a speaker, do you sense that? Are you aware of the change in you, how you use a language, of the words and phrases? Like, simple example is that in old days, even when I was a child, when you meet people senior or about same age, you tend to ask, 吃饭了吗? Oh, 您吃饭了吗? But it's like, how are you? How do you do? And since when did we stop greeting people in that way? Can we tell from which year? What incident that made us changed? And also, as native speakers of English, since when did you stop greeting each other by saying, how do you do? And if you hear someone saying, how do you do? You probably say, that's how they use our language. You probably don't know how do you do means anymore. And because nowadays we simply say hello to whoever at whatever situations. So this is the change. Then we learn and use another language when we need to. We never learn language without knowing that I'm learning a language for certain, for no reason. Even for fun, that's the reason. So then when did we begin to notice that we have been shaped by the language we speak? Or have we ever noticed it? When we change and we don't notice it, or have we noticed it? Or have we been shaped? Like, this is very common expression in the people's writing or introduction of themselves in China, at least up till the time before I left China. And people say, 这是我全家，我们有2个小孩，我的爱人非常爱我们，爱他们。So we say that. And then even my colleagues back in China, when they talking to the native speakers of English, introducing their families, and they just say, my lover loves my children. And my lover, I have a family, my lover and my 2 children. And then the native speakers got confused. This is your family and have children, my lover loves my children. And who is your lover? And then they didn't feel anything wrong. And you use it every day. This is 这是我爱人，这是我爱人，我爱人. So you talk about your husband or wife by referring to him or her as 爱人 or lover all the time. But now let's go back to China and ask people how many people would refer to their husband or wife by saying 爱人. They would find it funny. They don't use it anymore. And why didn't use it? Could it be because they changed the concept or their perception of marriage is changed? The relationship between husband and wife is changed. They have lovers, real lovers nowadays, outside of marriage, and they have to change. We don't know yet. But somehow we don't use this beautiful word anymore. Then understanding the mind shaped by 2 languages require us to understand, first of all, many things. Like, we can ask a simple question like, does acquiring a second language influence learning and behavior? The lover case, if you don't translate your sentence into English, is the monolingual way of speaking or using the word. But then we got to know, in 2004, there was a very interesting study conducted by Rosie Antle, and they used a lifelong perspective to look at bilingual development, not only in children, but also in adults. So it really gave me motivation and ambition to continue to do my research, to collect the data not only from children, but from people at different ages, and see how bilingual development occurs at different age groups. So in this study, it tells us that early adulthood is not the end point of development. Actually, no age period dominates development. And language abilities continue to reflect even the cerebral changes throughout the adulthood and into senescence. That means even when you are 80s, 90s, as long as you actively speaking even 1 language or 2 languages, your brain is changing because of the language. And this is amazing. Then a further question could be asked, does acquisitions actually, a second language, even influence the very structure of the brain itself? And we can ask a question first. Like in Singapore, Singaporeans switch from 1 language to another on a daily basis. Not only 1, 2 dialect, Hakka, Cantonese, Teochew, and Chinese, and local Chinese or Mandarin, etc. And then if you hear as a linguist, if I hear someone say, you speak Chinese, 华语 it's not easy 啦, or 华语 is easy 啦. So why does the person use Chinese and then switch to 华语 right away in one context? And we tend to ask, is it because the Chinese language was activated at the time when the person is talking about the language? If we think about how the brain functions. And then there's an interesting study conducted by McNally and his colleagues that shows that second language acquisition does influence the brain. And it's the language proficiency. If you just learned a second language and you know the grammar and you don't use it often, probably there won't be much changes in the brain. But if you reach certain levels of language proficiency, and in the brain at the bilateral superior temporal area, and you see these significant signal increases. And this result actually, regardless, it doesn't have any correlation with the IQ, and it's independent of verbal IQ and age of acquisition. As long as you have a higher language proficiency in your second language, and then there's significant signal increase. So it seems that you don't need to worry when you started to learn a second language. As long as you work hard, even when you are 60s, try to work hard. And then you can, once you start to speak the language, use the language, enough, and then your brain starts to function more actively than a monolingual speaker. This seems to tell us that you don't need to worry. You can wait until you have time, but it's not true. And the same study shows the other aspect, which is age of acquisition. And this study shows that this 10-year-old children's age acquisition of a second language. And they find this in the same area, there's a significant signal increases over time as function of exposure to the artificial language stream. And then there is a critical period. And this study shows that if children learned a second language before age 6, and there is a positive correlation. But if the second language is acquired after age 6, and there is slightly a negative correlation, it goes down. So that means this corresponds or supports the hypothesis that there is indeed a critical period in not only in first language acquisition, but also in second language acquisition. But as to how much it influences us or in behavior, in brain functions, cognitive development is still unknown. But then studies indeed have shown that there are lots of lifelong changes when a second language is acquired. And these are the list of things that I can name with different kinds of papers published, like social communication skills, learning behavior, joint attention, cognitive flexibility, memory capacity is increased, brain plasticity, like the one I just shown you, and knowledge increase, awareness increase, and there could be many others which are under study now. Then let's just take one example about this cognitive flexibility. Several studies, not only just one group of researchers from different places, and they have conducted this Stroop test. And Stroop test is a typical test that psychology students learned in year 1. And this test asks participants to name the words name the words as it is, and then they're asked to just name the color of the word. So you make a switch. And then the study shows that bilinguals spend measurably shorter time than monolinguals in such a test. That means bilingual speakers could probably have a higher ability in this cognitive switching. And this has been proved several times. Then if we believe that there's unconscious difference in personal opinions in two different languages, if this is a behavior change. So my question, after showing all these differences, and I would like to focus on presenting you a current study that I'm conducting in the Bilingual Development Lab. For the brain activities or brain development, we need more people, collaboration, and longer time to find a convincing result. Then what about conventional behavior studies? Could we provide some important data for the neuroscientists to see whether the behavior changes could actually support any kinds of brain change? So this is a case study of Singaporean bilinguals that I'm going to introduce. This study takes a social identity approach to the study of bilingual development in English Chinese speakers in Singapore. But please don't confuse me. In Singapore, there are many bilingual speakers who don't speak Mandarin or Chinese. They speak Tamil and Malay or even Chinese dialects and then English. But Chinese and English bilinguals are the majority. And this social identity approach applies both social identity and self-categorization theories to explore a possible correlation between bilingual speakers' language proficiency and silent shifts of social identities. So I want to see whether a bilingual speaker who has been speaking two languages, which are from different cultural backgrounds, could shift their social identities because of the languages they are speaking every day. So what is the social identity theory? This theory predicts certain intergroup behaviors on the basis of perceived group status differences, the perceived legitimacy and stability of those status differences, and the perceived ability to move from one group to another. Flexibility. The theory introduced the concept of social identity as a way to explain the intergroup behavior. And then another theory is involved or invented based on the social identity theory that is called self-categorization theory. So it's a combining theory to the social identity theory to produce a more general account of self and group processes. It views the self as the outcome of cognitive processes and an interaction between the person and the social context. So these two theories combined together could tell us whether people's social identities could be influenced by the languages they speak. I have two big objectives. One is to assess the bilingual proficiency in English, Chinese, bilingual young adults whose dominant language is English. Nowadays in Singapore, it's very hard to find bilingual speakers whose dominant language is Chinese. In our division of Chinese, yes, but in other schools at NTU and NUS, no, it's very hard. So language is shifting very rapidly. And then to explore the features of unconscious, silent changes in speakers' perspectives. with regard to social and personal values, family values, and relationships in expressing their opinions in a particular language, either in English or in Chinese. I have 4 research questions. One is, can young adult English-Chinese bilinguals in Singapore freely express their social identities and personal opinions in both English and Chinese when they are formally interviewed? But if you chat with friends, yes, I always can say, I'm a nice person, or I can easily get upset. So you always talk about this, whether you are monolingual or bilingual. But what about if you are formally interviewed and you are told that I'm going to ask you some sensitive issues, first in English, and then right away I'm going to ask you in Chinese. So we did it verbally as a pilot test. And we find out that those bilingual speakers, relatively well-balanced bilingual speakers, could feel comfortable. Yes, I can, I think. But if they are not balanced, no, I can't speak Mandarin well. I don't think I can express myself well. Expressions like this. And then the second one is, are they quietly reforming their social identities because of their switch between the 2 languages on a daily basis? So in one context, they speak one language. In another, they speak another language. Could this be an influence? And the third question is, can we assess their bilingual proficiency by identifying the features of their expressions when describing their self and social values in the 2 languages? Because it's not a question or a topic we talk about every day or often. At least we don't talk about these to strangers. This is my family value, or this is. But we can tell if someone talks a lot about his family, his children, his hometown, and we probably can guess what kind of values this person holds. And the last question is there a correlation between an English-Chinese bilingual speaker's proficiency in English and the level of his or her awareness of the difference in self and social values between Western and Asian societies? So you may wonder, why do I bring up these Western and Asian societies? Because English, after all, in different kinds of varieties of English, or Englishes are spoken in the regions that are called Western society. And Chinese is spoken in Asia mainly. So I have 2 hypotheses. The first one is pretty long, but let's take a look in details. Young adult English-Chinese bilinguals in a multilingual and multicultural environment unavoidably undergo a process of reformation of their social identities. This sounds pretty strong, but let's see. As a result, their perception of certain aspects of social identities, such as self and gender roles, can be reshaped quietly based on the level of involvement of the daily use of the 2 languages and by the influence of the social and ideological perspectives of Western culture through the English language and the globalization in Singapore. Because as you know, in Singapore, people watch TV programs mainly from the other countries. And there are Channel 8 and News 8, and not News 8, or Channel 8 and another one. So the Chinese programs are not many. The young people mostly watch TV programs, read newspapers that are produced by the Americans, British companies. So there's a big influence on their perception of how life could be, or how I can develop myself into someone that I see in movies or in certain programs. But at the same time, Singapore has these Chinese traditions down to the earth. If you come to Singapore during the Chinese New Year's time, you can see all this festival atmosphere. and people go to the temples and to bow and to wish good luck. All the people, rich or young or old or young or rich or poor. So there are two cultures, at least, embedded in this society, or maybe also embedded in the mind of the speakers. So we used 50 English Mandarin bilingual speakers, and then they are between age 21 to 27, and we checked their language competence and education and also religion. But I'm not going to talk about this part, it's still going on. So there might be influences from the religions they believe. And we used questionnaires which consist two parts, 40 incomplete sentences. And I largely used this high and lowers design and revised this design a little bit. And then we also used the demographic information form. And we asked the participants to fill in the demographic information form first, and then we got to know whether they are qualified for this study. And then we asked them to complete the 40 sentences, either in English first or Chinese second, and vice versa, and within the same time. We don't give them a break, you just do it. Yeah. And then no word limit for completing each sentence. They can elaborate. We encourage them to elaborate as much as they can. And here's a few sentences as a sample to show you. So we ask them, we give them a sentence like, when a child will not join in-group activities, you just complete the sentence in whichever way you want. And then raising a family, when I'm criticized, a man's job, being with other people, the thing I like about myself is. So, and later on we also have, because students, young people, they just want to provoke these participants. Can I ask questions like, I think sex outside marriage is. Sentences like this. So ask people's opinion about this. But we did tell the participants, there are some sensitive issues. If you don't feel comfortable to answer it, leave it empty. So that's what we did. And here are some summary of the results. Let's take a look at what are the contents, or what did participants express in their incompleted sentences. And we find out that we can divide them into these categories. Opinions, majority of the participants express their opinions, 40% in English and 34% in Chinese. And then behavior, describing behaviors, and then attitudes, emotions, and definitions. So when they answer questions like these, they give their personal opinions. They give definitions. They describe other people's behaviors. And they also express their emotions. Like, I would like a wife should be, or a wife should behave in whichever way. And then we take a look at the views they gave, like opinions, expressing behaviors, emotions. And then we want to see whether one participant completed sentences in English and Chinese, the contents are the same or different. And then we find out that actually 33% of the participants gave different views, even definitions, even personal opinions differently in the two languages. And they complete sentences within less than, but usually about an hour and a half. They were sitting there and doing it. And then you see, and we did ask them, don't go back to look at whatever you completed in English or in Chinese. Just once you see this sentence, you give your answers right away. So this is how they did it. And then we see some of them didn't give the answer, but mainly in Chinese. You see the lower competence in Chinese. And also you see there's slightly different views because we read each sentence very carefully. If this half emotion, half behavior description, and we scale it in different ways. Then here, there are a couple of interesting results I'm going to show you briefly. So this is features in relation to language and age. These more elaborations were found in English than in Chinese. And younger participants had more elaborations in English than in Chinese because the age range is 21 to 27. The older of the people are mainly working adults, and the younger ones are university students. And also, if we take a look at features of elaborations in relation to occupation, we find students performed better than working adults in elaborations in English than in Chinese, both the same. English better, Chinese less common elaborations. And of course, working adults, they say, yes, I'm willing, I'm interested in this test, but they want to finish it as quickly as possible. So students give more elaborations. And then here's a summary of one sentence. A married man should. And let's take a look. This is gender differences in views. And these are the results given by female participants. And those are the results given by male participants. And if you look at the figures highlighted in red, so for the females, they believe a married man should place work as his priority. So husbands and wife, you got to be careful because husbands expect he himself differently than their wives expect. And male tend to believe that this place family as his priority. So the majority people or male participants think place family as his priority is most important. Oh, a married man should. But female consider place work as his priority. And as to this, you can see almost 0.5% is the same as male's opinion. And then another sentence, two questions. One is a married woman should, and the next one, a married man should. So we already seen this one, but let's take a look at the percentage and make a comparison of these two. And for sentence 20, and the highest different views were given by female, which covered 52%. And then for the sentence 21, and for the female, it reached 60%. But for males, they both at expressing less in Chinese. So they different views. So female tend to give more different views than males. And males tend to either express it briefly or they focus on different things. Here are some specific sentences that we can see. The inconsistent views in English and Chinese. Now, take a look at this one. This female answered the questions complete this sentence in English by saying, a married woman should still be who she is and not be someone her husband wants her to be. That's in English. But when she answered the question in Chinese, she wrote, 洁身自爱. 洁身自爱 means, a literal translation is keep yourself clean, which means you should have, keep self-respect, self-esteem. So does it mean, my question is, does it mean this lady thinks differently when she's thinking in English, she focuses more on herself? In a different way. And the next one, the male's answer is, a married woman should do housework, take care of children, and have high tea with other married women. So Western style, going to have high tea and be, elegant and having high tea, have friends going out. But then in Chinese, the same person answered, 懂得怎样体贴老公. So not 爱人 lover, but 老公 means old gentleman, means my husband. So now how to take care of his husband? So when he was answering a complete sentence given in Chinese, his mode of thinking seemed to be completely in the Chinese value, culture. But when he was completing the sentence in English, his imagination of a perfect wife might be someone who could be able to having high tea, with other women. And next one, this a married man should, and this female's answer, be faithful. A married man, and this female's answer. And in her Chinese, she wrote, do what he should do. One focuses on loyalty, and the other focuses on responsibility or freedom. He should have his own judgment. And then the male participant answered, work hard and earn more than enough for the family. Money is more important. Is this a kind of Western idea? Time is money, money is, And then, know how to please his wife. So in Chinese, it's 懂得哄老婆开心. So a married man should focus on how to please his wife. So I'm not sure whether this is a Western or Asian. But if we have an open discussion, probably you could tell me whether this is Western or Asian. Okay, next one. Another, working it out and a student. So we compare between occupations. Like, working it out answered caring, dutiful, reliable, interesting. And in Chinese, 有爱心, 关心. So having a loving heart, caring for others. And then the student answered, be faithful to her husband, be responsible. Be faithful means be responsible. You can make an association, but you need to give the reasoning, logical reasoning, a few steps to make these two connected. And next one is working it out, be faithful, strong, reliable, funny, interesting, refreshing. And then having a sense of responsibility and be reliable. So that's the Chinese. So it seems that in English, you can have a more vivid imagination to think about someone, maybe because these students, most of them, probably only less than 10 of them have very serious relationships and married, but others are all just young people. So they must have lots of imaginations of their future husband and wife. And this is the one. And the student says, protect his family and be faithful to wife. And then in Chinese is 听老婆的话，不让她受伤. And this is very colloquial. 老婆is what's the English equivalent to 老婆? Is there an equivalent? No? Yeah, 老婆. Oh, there are many terms to refer to your wife in Chinese, but this is more colloquial, like a body type, and this one is 不让她受伤. Listen to his wife and protect her from being hurt. So I'm the warrior, so I will just protect her. Is this Western or Asian? Another question. And then here's a summary of one sentence, like my weakness, we leave it empty, and then 我的弱点, empty. And we made a summary, and we can see that female participants' answers are different in English and in Chinese. So when they express about their weaknesses, take a look at what they focus is. And then when they express it in Chinese, they are different. So there are many things that are worth analyzing and understanding the mind of bilinguals. What triggered them to answer in English in this way, and what triggered them to answer the same sentence in different ways? Or could be a focus change. This is males. You also find differences. And also, at the same time, could you see the differences in general between male and female just by looking at English answers or Chinese answers without cross-taking? And this could also be a different perspective to see the changes of the social values, personal values, and family values. And then this is a summary of the features of the linguistic aspect that I'm going to work on later on this. Like in English, if you take a look at how they use the language, I find out that they use more nouns used to express one's own stances or opinions, and more general words used, more words or words that are more polysmers used, and more antonyms, more metaphors, and set phrases. And in Chinese, the typical example is when they give opinions, personal opinions, they use this no as negation most often. And then let's come to more specific usages, differences in language. Like marriage, relationship, unhealthy relationship outside marriage is even all those sensitive issues. And then some of the people just answer it by saying it's acceptable, whether you can have a sexual relationship before the marriage. And most people just say acceptable or unacceptable, or others elaborated in giving, oh, that's nasty, that's very bad, that's against culture, things like this. And then you see that for this acceptable, the participants, when they write in English, they all just simply say acceptable. But when they write in Chinese, they write 能够接受的,没有错的,合理的,可以的,可以容忍的. Let's assume that they answered this question right away and they switch to another language. And this acceptable concept is changed to all the other 5. They are not the same anymore. And the same thing is true with faithful. And then, could it be, let's take a look at the lexicon. Sometimes if we, as a general linguist, trained by, in general linguistics, we tend to focus on the concepts first. Whether a lexicon word has a lexiconized concept, which has the equivalent in the other languages. And in this respect, we can say acceptable is the equivalent of 能接受的. So we can say same perspective, same lexicon meaning. That's okay. Then what about the others? When the participants used different Chinese when they answered this question, this one, they're not the equivalent anymore. So it twisted a little. So what does this reflect? When these speakers saying acceptable, but in Chinese he says this is not wrong. This means 没有错, that means this is not wrong. So we tend to wonder, is this a reflection of the speaker's social values? He said, it's not wrong because in this social value, we allow it. And the next one is 合理的. 合理 means reasonable. So what does this reflect? A kind of reasoning? Once you are given this sentence, you think, it happens in this way. You are in love, you like each other. Yeah, you live together, you don't need a certificate. Reasonable. So is there this kind of process of reasoning behind? And the next one, 可以的, that means it's okay, or you are allowed in a way. So what does this reflect? A personal opinion or judgment when such a thing happens? So all this shows different kinds aspects of thinking in the same sentence. And the last one is 不可容忍的, means we cannot allow it, or we cannot endure it. We cannot put up with it. And this is even further than all these. So this is the equivalent. And then you see the concept is changed. So what does this reflect? Social acceptance, values, or judgment? We don't know. At least we know they are different. And in terms of the lexicon meanings, they are not equivalent. By any definition in any dictionaries, you cannot find this. Okay, then what you probably would say, oh, these are the words you use to stimulate people to think about lots of things about concepts, about opinions. So people tend to have the flexibility to choose the words that momentarily they focus on certain aspects. Because of this, when I was preparing for this talk, I thought maybe it's a good idea to show 2 slides about my other study, which was conducted 2 years ago. And one of them is going to be accepted by Journal of Cognitive Science. And we conducted a study of throwing action verbs in English, Chinese, and German. In Chinese, there are 10 monosyllabic throwing action verbs. 扔, 撇, 抛, 甩, 丢, 掷, 投. So there are so many monosyllable throwing action verbs. And in English, there are more, but we focus on these 6. And in German, there are also 6. Throwing action verbs, we didn't conduct it within a social or behavioral context. We just asked the participants to look at these actions. You performed, upwards, downwards, sideways, these ways. We checked all the corpus data and the dictionary. We come up with the different kinds of action components. And then we use these action components to define all these features, like force, motion, motion direction, upward or horizontal, vertical posture of the arm and the hand. And also, so we conducted 2 tests. One is we asked the participants to look at the video clip of each action and ask them to tell, what is he doing? We use a novel object. You cannot tell what that is. So we ask them, what is the person doing? And then say, 扔, 他在扔东西, 他在撇那个东西, 他在丢那个东西. But then we give them all the lexicon words, throwing action verbs. And say, do you know these verbs? They say, yes, we all know these. Okay, now I'm asking you, 请扔这个东西, 请抛这个东西, 请撇这个东西. So we conducted 2 tests. One is perceptual, and the other is behavior. And then we conducted in the same way with the monolingual English speakers and German speakers as well. And that was done actually in Germany. And that was done in Singapore. And we find these interesting differences in people's perception of the actions. And this is the Chinese speakers' identification of the actions. When they see the action, and then they say this, because if we perform the action like this, and then the participants say, 抛那个东西, and then we can just label it as this horizontal direction, vertical direction. Sometimes we use false, and then that's false, and hand and arm, and all the 6 throw verbs in Chinese are identified by the Chinese speakers with more, features. And in German, slightly less. And in English, it seems that native speakers of English tend to also they use all these action components, but slightly different. But the Chinese use motion direction, false, and even sideways to identify these synonymous actions. So for instance, in English native speakers, they don't think if you throw something sideways as a feature for identifying action verb. So this shows that the concepts formed in the speakers based on the perceptual understanding of the reality. And then you code it into different kinds of components. And then you come up with a concept. Then you label it as pao or pi or shai. And this is how we can understand why native speakers can differentiate near synonyms. But as a second language speaker, you really have to have a really high proficiency to distinguish near synonyms. Okay, so brief discussion. So this study, actually, these participants' perception of the social identities such as self, gender, and family roles was found to be typical of the collectivist ideas of Chinese-speaking society. So in Singapore, it's the Chinese-speaking society, and the social values of the collectivism is highly valued. However, the relative proficiency in the 2 languages correlated with the participants' perception of self-value and gender roles in particular. And in giving their opinions on the sensitive issues, both males and females were more expressive, more open when they use English than in Chinese. So when you switch to English, you feel like I can say whatever I think. But when I speak Chinese, I got to think, is this against the social value or not? Could this be? And the consistency in the participants' English and Chinese views was found only in those that were typical of Asian values. If it is against the Asian value, you don't find many inconsistent views. And then longer sentences showed a shift of social identities toward typical Western values, or I call it a struggle. I haven't come out a better word yet. It's kind of struggle or dilemma. I think it's okay, that's acceptable. But then if he keeps on elaborating this issue, you can see his value is changed. So there is a struggle between Western and Asians. Conclusion. Yeah, the results of the study to date support the second hypothesis. There is evidence to support the first hypothesis. However, more detailed analysis need to be conducted and determined. So we need to really take a more careful look at the data to make a convincing statement. The bilingual speakers were able to express their social identities and values in both languages. So luckily, they are all willing and express their opinions. And the participants did not show a well-formed social and cognitive understanding of the Western values. So you find that there is a kind of twist. Actually, Westerners don't treat husbands or wife in that way. But somehow they think it's a free society. You can do whatever you want. So that was a misunderstanding. However, they expressed more inconsistent views in English and Chinese with more elaborations of personal opinions in English than in Chinese. And many linguistic, cognitive, and social culture features were identifiable from participants' use of both English and Chinese. And to some extent, and they indeed reflect different patterns of thinking while speaking a particular language. Now, this is the time for us to recall the two arguments. The one is rhetorical differences reflect patterns of thinking. The other is reflect the culture conventions learned in a culture context or culture patterns of learning. And for this study, I cannot say how much it supports the first argument or second argument. It's almost like a nature and a nurture thing, but at least I believe more studies can be done and to give further supports. And I find some further supports. We all know Professor George Hopton now. His wonderful talk just really interests us a lot. He's going to give a talk on March 10th in our school. And look at his abstract. He said, languages are human creatures, tools we invent and hone to suit our needs. If people learn another language, they also learn a new way of looking at the world. And also, he says, language also plays a critical causal role in cognition. So I don't need to continue. So according to George, language does influence human cognition. And human cognition happens here. So that's the brain. And also, there's another interesting book that calls The Silent Transformations by Francis Jolene, an interesting French writer. And also, in this book, if you Google, you can find this book. It says, how does our language grant and shape our sense of beingness? What, if anything, is the beginning of things? And why does the answer matter? It's a difficult book, but if you read it slowly, carefully, you find very interesting evidence that shows there's a silent transformations. And that involves these basics of epistemology and also metaphysics. So you can find lots of evidence so far. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that talk. We can take some questions now. Any questions for Professor Gao?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Now I've been shown and humble. I think I don't want to comment too much, but I've been in a position with my family to experience much what you have shown. And I just want to make a few points which I think are relevant to your presentation. We are multilingual, but we are also multicultural. My wife is Japanese, and she's very proud of that, although she spent much of her life in the Western world, although she goes to Japan regularly. And I noticed something which is different from Chinese, but related. For instance, now she has a business partner, a couple, a man and a woman. They come to visit us regularly, and when they are there, I leave them alone, and they speak Japanese. When she speaks to him, her tone is pretty low, and her mode of expression is neutral. But when she speaks to him, she jumps one octave, and she speaks female Japanese, which is different.
Yeah.
And when they are gone, we talk, and I say, what did you discuss? And I said, with him, no problem, just like with you. But with her, I cannot explain, because I think differently.
Yeah.
So when she speaks French or English or Spanish when she goes to Spain, there's no problem. Now, the other thing is that we have two daughters, and both of them went to the French-American International School in San Francisco, and they have lived for decades in English-speaking, American-speaking environment, and but at home, we insisted on speaking French to keep some kind of personal link. And the same thing happened. They both wrote French, and obviously, and that's the point you made, and that's the point I'm going to make on Thursday, the way they think and articulate when they speak at home and when they speak with their American friends who are English-speaking is different. The other side of the coin, which you insisted, is that their performance and their academic performance, or their social and professional performance, has been way, way, way superior to what the monolingual friends they kept in France or the ones they had in the United States. Now, one lives in Barcelona. Of course, she learned Spanish in middle school, and she got a scholarship to teach Spanish in Valencia, which was quite interesting. And now her children, 3 boys, at home switch from one language to another. The problem is that there are 2 Romance languages and one which is English, and so it could be considered as 2 groups. The second, I was, when I was 18, not even 18, close to 18, I was a simultaneous translator at the Security Council of the United Nations. And actually, it was trilingual, but I was asked to speak French or English and to translate both ways. And there's one problem which I knew and really I faced, that English is about 10 times more words than French. And, you know, to translate French into English, yeah, you have a choice and you pick up the one that comes to your mind. But when you have to translate very specific English words to French, where the equivalent doesn't exist, you have to build a sentence. And this is a nightmare. So the way people think, and the French, I can guarantee you, speak very differently from the Anglo-Saxons in general, or Scandinavian. And I found this type of experience, which you illustrated and explained to me, in fact, so that I understand it better. But I just was subject, and I'm still a subject of that, is a way, literally, to build the world in a slightly different way.
I totally agree.
We don't see, when I read the original text in French, German, Italian, or Spanish, and in English, I am immersed in the story or in the description in the book in a different way. The colors look different. Yeah. The feelings, the emotions are more or less intense. The tastes are different. When I read the menu in French, I taste the food differently when I read it than when I read it in English. I'm sorry, but it's true. So I think what Helena is doing is to bring not only a light at the end of the tunnel, but literally a spotlight in things that Singapore illustrates very well. And I think also what we should be aware of is that we are facing internal conflicts, which are hidden, and which we have to respect or to anticipate. And it's not easy, but it's one of the successes, but it's not done yet, that Singapore is perfectly positioned to do.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, George. Actually, George brought up an issue about other languages. Your wife, who is a Japanese. Japanese is labeled, according to Kaplan, as one of the Oriental languages. And because of that, it was very much criticized because Japanese is very different from Chinese. And there are lots of, we have an expert over there, Sushi. And I never dared to learn Japanese because I was worried to make mistakes. When you speak to people, if you used a wrong term, you could be very offensive. So that's why when you speak Japanese, you even have to lower your tone to different people. And is it part of the language, of social behavior that is merged into the language? So there are many things that could affect us just because you speak another language. But if you haven't reached certain kinds of proficiency, you could make lots of mistakes or even conflicts. And like most of the time when I speak English, I don't feel comfortable, especially in such an audience. And I tend to ask myself, why am I not feeling comfortable? I'm presenting my own stuff. It's the language. It's the language barrier. You are speaking a foreign language. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. That was really fascinating.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, what do you envision are the practical applications of your research? For instance, is it something that some of us, and I was in the corporate world for a long time, could use when we evaluate candidates? You know, there's always that danger when you see somebody Chinese and Singaporean, you think you can send them to China. They can, you know, they'll fit right in, right? In the work that I used to do on the regional level, we had a lot of conference calls where you can't see, it's not face-to-face, and you can only hear. So you talk about the tonality and the use of language. We had so many problems between a Chinese speaker in China and a Chinese speaker in Singapore.
Yeah.
And I just always used to think, what could we have done at the candidate selection point before we hire this person?
Right.
And but obviously we're not going to do tests like yours. But are you thinking further down the line that this actually can be used in a practical way?
Yeah, definitely, it can be. I was working at the University of Toronto designing a measurement tool to identify the level of bilingual development. And I have been continue working on this here in Singapore, both for children and for adults. And I haven't thought about the practical aspect yet, but the way of what I use is for supervising my students, both undergraduate and PhD students. And also, I'm running a master program in translation and interpretation, which was launched by NTU in January. And this 30 students, working adults from Singapore, they come to pay a high tuition to learn this translation. And only a few of them, as I could see, could become professional translators. And why are we, setting up such a program, ask the Singaporeans pay such a high fee and to learn to be a translator? So on the first day, I told them, don't expect that you can become a professional translator or interpreter. Translation programs never produce, full percent of translators, but it immensely helps you, your language proficiency that can be applied in your working environment. And your language, your future career could be really triggered to excel because of the two languages you speak much better than your colleagues. So there is a practical aspect.
I think when we speak to with someone, it's not just the language, I feel, because even sticking to just one language and you're speaking with a person in the same language, right? There are so many cues from the other party that will prompt us to, speak in a certain way, because the ultimate motivation is to communicate, is so that he or she knows what's on my mind. It's for me to understand the other party as well. So, and I find also, let me give you one specific example. There is this hymn writer from a village in China, and she has such an amazing success, with her hymns. She's able through the hymns to touch like millions of people. I've seen so many YouTube programs of her hymns being sung in Chinese communities all over the world. And so I tried to figure this out myself. How could she be so successful? And I think it's because when I read her hymns, it reminds me of a Heineken advertisement. The Heineken reaches the parts that no other beer could reach, something like that. So it has got that ability to enter the person straight to the feelings, as opposed to a hymn that has been translated from the original, no matter how good the translation is. Right. So it is more than just, okay, I speak Chinese, therefore I can fit right in China. It's not that. There's just so many other factors involved. You need to know something about the culture of the other person, so that you can speak in a way that you feel that the other person can relate to, because he has that cultural background. He knows what you're referring to. Right. There are expressions, that two Chinese speakers, but the one without that cultural knowledge, he would not be able to relate to it.
Right. Actually, you raised a different question. It's more about communication skills. You don't have to be, bilingual to identify yourself as a good speaker or not. Actually, I think America produced more good speakers than Singapore or China, because the education at the elementary school focuses on how to tell children how to express themselves. parents also focus on, tell me how you feel. Are you all right? Or is this? So parents always try to encourage children to tell how they feel and to express themselves. And like last year, I have a nephew from who was born in Boston. He came to visit me, and a young man met him. He's a slightly autistic child, and he's 18 now. And he graduated normally from the high school, and he has lots of breaks. When he was talking, you could see his brain was blocked. His eyes were sparkling, you know, that kind. You feel pity. But once you raise up a serious issue, social values, family values, relationships, he could, just like a good speaker, he was talking, you know, giving his personal opinions, and you couldn't believe that someone, you know, a child who has autistic, you know, child could express himself so freely. So I talked with him, what kind of programs did you go to? Or what? He took communication classes all the way. His parents sent him to the communications classes to learn to express himself. But we don't have such programs. We focus more here in Asian countries on how to do the formulas, how to do the sum up and minus and plus. So language abilities to express yourself has to start from the childhood. That's why when I set up this bilingual lab, my first goal is to help the bilingual children to learn to be well-balanced bilinguals at a younger age. How to express yourself in both languages. So when you come to older age, it's much more of your personality that could help you more, your life experience that could help you more. But it's no longer the kind of skills that you developed that go along with the cognitive development. But it doesn't mean there's no chance. There's always chance. Our brain has to plasticity.
I find it very interesting that you can understand things in different ways, depending on which language you use, or if you can speak several languages. That you can read a book, for example, in one language, and then read the same book in another language, and understand it maybe a little bit different.
Right.
But my question is, does the brain change significantly more if you learn a language that is very different from your first language?
Yeah. There are such interesting studies, like a group of researchers, I don't remember the name. I read an article about a high school program in I think it's in New York State. And some children had difficulties learning English, because English is the language they use. So what the school did was to open up foreign languages, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Japanese. And one typical example is that a boy who learned Chinese, who switched from English to Chinese, and he became a smart boy in his other classes. So this is a change. And there are also like, there are some studies conducted in University of Hong Kong, Chinese University of Hong Kong. They also show that Chinese language, the brain functions is different in different regions in the brain than you speak English. And then the activation of the Chinese could support you to understand different kinds of things that you find difficult in the other language. So the language the two languages have to belong to different language families, and then you see the differences. I believe there will be more such studies coming out. Brian?
Yeah, really interesting, thank you.
Thank you.
There's a lot of evidence that we don't think in language that much. You know, if I'm drinking a really delicious cup of tea, I'm enjoying it, and that involves emotion and perception.
Yes.
Yet I don't put it in language, or don't need to put it in language unless I'm talking to someone.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's by the same token, if you're trying to express an idea, I have been told by philosophers, I suppose, that somehow the idea forms before we put it in language. So we have an idea,
Mm-hmm.
somehow the idea wells up from the subconscious, it enters the consciousness. One of the last things that happens is it's put in language. So I'm wondering if I'm bilingual, say in Chinese and English, where does the bifurcation happen? You know, I have this thought, suppose you ask me a complicated question, and then I get this thought that's not even in any language, how I'm going to answer you.
Right.
And it goes down one street in English and a different street
Yeah.
in Chinese. Where and how does that bifurcation happen? Is it a switch? Because it's not just language, you're telling us it's also
Yeah.
switching into different
Yeah.
cultural clothing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. It's very much so. The evidence you just mentioned actually are the strong foundation for people to believe that it's the language that shapes your thought. So when you think, because this English is your native language, and you tend to think in this pattern or this mode, because this pattern or mode can help you to express it whenever necessary. For instance, we call the mental lexicons, like think, guess, suppose, predict. And in Chinese, we have this 我想, 我认为, 我觉得. And in Swedish, you can do tycker om, tyck. And then, like a theory of mind tests with children, when the experimenter asks a child, what do you think Lisa will go? So when you ask a question, what do you think Lisa think? Oh, can you guess where Lisa will go? Where do you suppose Lisa will go? So if you use these different kinds of mental lexicons, you actually focus on different kinds of aspects of thinking. In Chinese, if you say 我觉得, that is more like according to my feeling, my experience. But if you say 我认为, it's more based on the logical thinking. Also experience, but logically, I come to the conclusion things will happen in this way. So that's why if there are more lexicons in a language, especially like these mental words, could we say that this is actually a reflection of how many aspects of thinking could be, and in this language, at least, it helps a thinker to be able to reflect these aspects of their thoughts. But there are still other aspects that are not lexiconized yet, but they are there. Did I answer your question?
One other quick observation is that, yes, English is my native language, but I've spent a good deal of my life in America. And if I go back to Ireland, in America I'm speaking English. Some people might debate that, but I'm speaking English. And then if I go to Ireland, I'm still speaking English. But I notice that if somebody American, let's say I'm somewhere in Ireland, and if an American asks me, it doesn't look like a very good day today, but it might clear up. Now, if I'm speaking American English, I would say, oh yes, I think you're right, but what's making you say that? You know, so there's all this sort of,
Yeah.
let's get the facts straight.
Yeah.
If somebody in Ireland were to say to me, you know, it's a desperate day out there this morning, but I think it might clear up a bit. Then, speaking the same language, I would say, oh yes, it's horrible indeed, but it looks lovely in an hour. So, because the way we speak English, the interchange is a mode of agreement. You're trying to be agreeable. In America, you're trying to get the facts straight, and yet that's just with one language.
Yeah, but Brian, this part is interesting. This part is the social aspect of language acquisition. It's no longer the mental thinking, how the mind gradually form concepts. It's more what you learn in a society. You need to make commitment. We call it the communication commitments. If someone says it's a horrible weather, you wouldn't say, oh, it's a sunny day, I love it. You would say, yes, it's so cold. Even though you feel warm, you would still say it's cold. So that's the social aspect of language acquisition, which makes language learning even more complicated.
What do you think of the influence of music in language, and especially for children, for improving academic performance? I had a program in Chongqing at the Southwest Hospital, which is a military hospital, and we identified several groups of young recruits, and they were assigned to groups that loved pop music or jazz or American music. Some of them loved Chinese music. Some of them didn't care. And an important group was musicians, people who practice an instrument. And depending on these groups, they were asked to perform in Chinese military. I guess in most military now, they have to learn new skills, intellectual, for instance, how to, not talking about piloting a fighter jet, but even in working in the office and putting things together properly. And what happened is that if you were looking after 18 months at, and they were all the same age, the same food, the same, and the ones who played the instrument and who were asked to practice were by far above the other one. So it was not a question of language, but it was a question of academic performance, which is in a way related.
Yeah.
Then the ones who listened regularly to the music they liked, there was no difference between, slightly better for the Chinese music lovers than for the pop music or jazz music lovers. And then the ones who were, they were not bad, but they were below the ones who didn't play an instrument and who preferred to watch TV or do something than to listen to music. Now, my question is, here there's not a problem of language, there's not a problem of culture. All these people were in the same, not identical mold, but they came from different parts of Sichuan and let's say northwestern part of China. But we were surprised. I mean, the neuroscientists who supervised the study were surprised to see how that influenced young people. And they are still looking for explanation because they are still publishing different papers in different journals, and people are not satisfied with their current explanation now. You are looking at a much more complex issue, which is bilingualism. That means not only the language, but the sound, the writing, the integration into a multicultural society. But do you feel that there's something that could be included in future research, which is looking at this kind of emotional or non-verbal or non-reading form of expression?
Thank you. Actually, there was a study conducted by Department of Music in Lund University in the mid-90s. And they had a collaboration with one of my colleagues at Lund University in Sweden, not Switzerland, in Sweden. And then they tried to see whether music could help people to identify syllables in languages. And the preliminary result showed that they could have a better chance to identify tone languages like Chinese, Finnish, Italian. So music does play a role in language, but in general, music helps us to express ourselves. Yeah, thank you. Jeffrey, do you have a question?
We can carry on the discussion for the coffee break. So,
yes.
Okay, so thank you again for the presentation, and thank you all.